once it's stopped. But yeah, if you, we are going to be using for our font management software, Suitcase Fusion. And then for doing our assignments, we are going to be using Adobe Illustrator. So if you have not put them in your handy dandy little dock down here at the bottom, basically what you can do is if you go to the Finder and then you go to Applications, in your Applications folder, you will have Suitcase Fusion 6. If you want to put it in your dock, all you have to do is click and drag and put it in your dock, and it will be there. Same thing with Adobe Illustrator. Grab that, put that in your dock, and again, it'll be there. So this is Suitcase Fusion that we will be using to manage our fonts, etc. Okay. If we look at the schedule then, so if we look at the schedule, your Logotype Study 1 is due at the end of next week. So let's briefly take a look at that and what that entails. So here then is my example download that you can use as a template only. In other words, this file is set up to where, so if you download Logotype Study 1, zip, oh, now they're downloading things to the desktop. They've changed it. Interesting. Sounds good to me. Extension. Sometimes it'll download on your scratch space, which is, you can see your scratch space drive right here. Basically, does anybody know what a scratch space is? Why it's there? Photoshop. Photoshop uses a hard drive. A lot of times people will, are you downloading or are you done downloading? What's going on here? Huh, interesting. Let me then, I'm going to put that in my Emerson Kula folder under Documents. And it's going to tell me, hey, you already have one. So if I then logo study 1, right, and open that up here in Illustrator. Oh, missing fonts, right? So basically, remember how we were talking about if you have ever sent a document to somebody or received a document and it has told you, hey, the fonts are missing. and you think to yourself, well, I have Futura, I'll just use my version of Futura, right? And then your version of Futura has a slightly different, I don't know, whatever you would want to say, kerning table, size in the bounding box, etc., right? Because it was made by one font foundry or another. And what I'm talking about by font foundries is if we go to Suitcase, what you can see here is a list of fonts, and you can see here Font Foundry, right? And Adobe, because Adobe rules the world. Tiro, Typeworks. You guys have heard of Adobe, right? Monotype is, where'd it go? Monotype is another popular foundry. But basically, let's say Foundry A, Foundry B, right? Foundry A could be Adobe Systems, and Foundry B could be Monotype, right? So if you have the Adobe Systems font on your computer, and somebody else used the Monotype Foundry font on theirs, there might be very small discrepancies that you can't really see right away to the, I guess, naked eye, if you want to say it like that. But if you then use your version of the font and you have a 6-page magazine spread, and at the end of the 6-page magazine spread, there's an extra line of type that's not supposed to be there, and it gets printed, and you've just wasted $50,000, right? That's possibly what could happen. Does that scare everybody enough? I try to scare people as much as possible, right? So if we're in Illustrator then, right now, I'm not gonna turn those on because what you can do then is, like I said, use this, oh, look at the artboard is a little different. This I've used, when I put this document together, I think I put it together using CS3, right? So if you have some discrepancies like this, where I think the artboard should be, let's take a look. Does everybody know what I'm talking about by the artboard? Mm-hmm. If you don't, this little tool right there, oh, close that. If I open that up, preset custom, that's not what I want. I want preset letter. Great, so now it's at letter. But one way, shape, or form, what I want you to do is, and that's not New York, that's fine. There's always, every time they update the software here, it's always kind of fun to see what looks different, right? I believe they just updated the Creative Cloud suite here to the 2.15 one, even though it's 2.16 or 2016. But anyway. So what you can do then is use this template strictly for, hey, there's 10 up. So when you guys are doing your business name 10 times, so let's say you're doing business name in times, right? You can just do that, and then if you want to select this being a different typeface, Stone looks great to me. And then you're going to change the name here to Stone. What was it? Stone Sands. I think it was bold. Bold. And then, oops, that's out of the box right there. We can move that down to 36 points. We can move it down to 24 point or move it up a little bit to kind of fit the box, right? So that's a good representation of, hey, that's Times bold 40 point, and this right here is Stone Sands. And if I went back to 40 points, wow, that looks a lot bigger, doesn't it? Right? So if we went back and just said 36 and then use this to kind of go down a little bit, all I want you to do, let's say, what is the point of logo type study 1?
To compare and contrast.
What?
To compare.
Who said it? Yes. So in other words, I want you to pick fonts. Please no papyrus. Not even as a joke. It's not funny anymore. Comic Sans, it's not funny. So basically, you are going to start with 10 or 100, however many you want to do. You have to turn in 10, right? But my hope is that you get totally addicted to this, right? And you can't stop. That's what typography can be crack. I'm not going to lie to you. It can be pretty addictive. But you're going to do 10 of your personal name, 10 of a business name, right? And you are going to do this. For those of you viewing this at home, can't see what I'm doing, you'll have to guess what I'm doing. But yeah, it's basically to compare and contrast, see how these communicate to you, right? So if we pass, or if we look at this, Julie Anderson one, right? This communicates, use some verbiage to tell me what that one kind of looks like. Or give me some adjectives, give me some descriptions. Handwriting. Personal. Signature. Artistic. Retail. Retail? Really? Okay. What about this one? Professional, modern, a little more readable, so on and so forth, right? So what you guys are going to start doing is typefaces play that role. Communication. Remember how I said that one of the words that I am going to use very, very often is communication. So what do each of these typefaces communicate to me about this business, right? Because remember how I told you that my old logo looked too snowboardy, right, too wakeboardy, and so I got kind of pigeonholed into the snowboard, wakeboard industry, and those guys didn't have very much money, at least the guys I was dealing with, right? And I thought to myself, well, I'm not making as much money as I want to. So I made a shift into redoing my logo to attract the more corporate, not necessarily corporate, but let's just say clients that had more money than the snowboarders, right? Simple as that, okay? So does that make sense to you, what you guys are gonna be doing, right? So like I said, right now, if you download this, you're gonna see that fonts aren't working. That's okay. We don't have to worry about it at this point in time. But let's talk now about history of the font. What is a font? Again, quiz, pop quiz. Worth absolutely no points. Difference between typeface and font.
Font is what we see.
Okay.
Font is manufactured.
Who said manufactured? Okay. Font is the manufactured copy of the typeface. So the typeface is the design, right? So they can be used very synonymously. In other words, if I was saying, what typeface is that? You'd say Futura. If I said, what font is that? You'd say Futura. Made by such and such foundry, right? Does that make sense? So that's where the discrepancy comes into play. Yeah.
So different Foundries make the same font slightly different.
Yes. Yes. Why? I don't know. I guess it's sort of like, you know, Ford has their little hybrid. Toyota has their little hybrid. They look very, very similar. They function very, very similar. Well, that's not really good. That's an apples and oranges
The
kind of thing.
matrices change over time.
What?
The matrices change over time.
Sure. Right. It all. You have the answer?
One thing is kind of like my thought went to like t-shirts. You can have a white t-shirt, but it's made by Hanes,
Yeah.
American Apparel.
Right.
But they all fit differently, but
Yeah.
they are a white t-shirt.
Right. Exactly. It's a white T-shirt design. Right. We designed a white T-shirt, cotton T-shirt. Perfect. I like that. You're now on recording. You're famous. So, history of the font. Again, font. A set of type of one particular face and size. Right? So, a set of type that is a typeface, a design, at a particular size. Also, a particular weight. Right? So, if we, again, go back here and I choose that, right? Times then has regular italic bold and bold italic. So that is then where we will start talking about font families, okay? So it may be in your best interest to, let me show you a resource here. Stick to what I call kind of the classic typefaces, right? Meaning the traditionally, I don't know if you want to call them old school or whatnot, but come on, website. Uh-huh. Uh-huh. Uh-oh.
Would you break?
Not me, DreamHost. Let's see if restarting my server. We'll do that. There we go. Oh. See if it loads. Okay, let's get back into the history of the font, and we'll go back to the link that I want to talk about in terms of classic typefaces. But where did fonts come from? How did they originate?
No, letterpress.
True. How did digital fonts then? So yeah. So
Mimicking
how did
letterpress.
fonts originate? We just talked about it last week in terms of movable type, Gutenberg's printing press. Is that,
your question?
that's where you're, okay. Was that your answer?
No,
What was your answer?
was it Apple, the Mac,
In terms of digital?
digital fonts? Yeah.
Well, it could have been. Let's just say it like this. When fonts started coming around, right? In other words, we needed to use typefaces on the computer, let's say. Well, how were computers set up way back when, right? You had one bit of data that, in other words, what does digital mean? Either on or off, either a 1 or a 0, either a black square or not, right? So we first started out with bitmap fonts that, I don't know exactly where, let's see. It doesn't say if it was Apple or whatnot. Let's just say computers in general that needed to render type on the screen, right? So what they would do then to render type on the screen is, in terms of a traditional bitmap, and let's say it like this. Is everybody familiar with the .bmp file format that they call bitmap, right? That is incorrect in terms of a labeling system, right? A bitmap basically means bits of data put together, placed together to either make a smiley face or the Oregon Trail wagon where you got dysentery. Remember, everybody remembers that, right? And this is how fonts were rendered. Efficient? For the time, possibly. Efficient for us today? Absolutely not, okay? So bitmap fonts were a very clever and simple approach, but the more dots a bitmap contained, the more computer data it required. So as resolution of devices increased, they started to, whoever they were, started to create outline fonts. Okay, so this is important into what we're talking about here in terms of this is going to suck if oh, good thing I have that up. In terms of what you see right now, you can possibly see how chunky it is a little bit right there, right? In other words, that looks like that angle is being rendered by squares. That looks similar to this, right? So how curves were rendered way back when was by putting square dots together, so it wasn't a perfect curve, right? Totally inefficient for what we're going to try to do. But how it's relevant to what we are doing here is there is still a screen font and a printer outline font that is within a font. In other words, does anybody remember back in the day, and when I say that, I mean me, pretty much. I'm basically dating myself. But did anybody ever use an inkjet printer, like an Epson 740? You know what I'm talking about, Michael? And it says, when you go to print something out, it says it can't find the printer font. Who remembers that? Anybody?
Yep.
Okay. So what that is you have one font or one part of the font to render things on the screen, and the other to print things out nice and crisp and clearly here, okay? So long and short, where we are today is we are using outlines in as our vectors in our fonts, meaning if we went back to that one screenshot that I showed you of Fontographer, and we talked about, let's just use that one for example, when we talked about how somebody is creating the pieces of a typeface, right? They are actually creating this as vector artwork, okay? That then they are also translating into, like I said, a printer font and a screen font all in a font set, right? So what's actually in a font set then? Okay. Well, in a font set, you basically have the whole character set. How many of you have ever been typing something with a font and you tried to use a special character and instead you got a rectangle?
Yeah.
Okay, so what actually happened there is the person making the font did not make all of the special characters. More time, more money. More money, more problems, I know. It's a vicious cycle, right? But in this character set, we briefly talked about it in terms of there is the width table and there is the kerning table. In other words, the width table, as far as I understand it, is the width of the bounding box, right? So if this character, let's see if we can find a good one. If this character was set into the standard box, right, that each and every piece of type or each letter form sat in, that would be, from what I understand, the width table. Then the kerning table is, let's see if I can go back to, seriously, everybody leave me alone. Quit calling me. Here's what not to do if you can help it. Don't put, if you're running your own business and the number you put on your website is your cell phone, yeah, expect New York to call you a lot. New York and LA and come on, load, load, load. Yay. So then the kerning table would be, again, if we have an uppercase T and a lowercase r, again, right here, and again, I should do it for those viewing at home, right? Because here's what I've done before. The people that are viewing this video at home cannot see them pointing here up on the projector, right? But they can see if I'm pointing with the cursor right here. So if this line right there is the edge of the T's bounding box, and this edge right there is the edge of the R's bounding box, notice the overlap because of this big gap in the uppercase T, right? So each font then in the character set has a width table, lists the horizontal space allotted to each character, right? Again, remember how let's go back to the history typography lecture where, and again, all these screenshots right here are out of the complete manual typography book, right? And I can use them on my website because you guys are buying these books. So again, in a certain font set, the M might be 15 units wide. In another font set, the M might be 12 units wide. But one way, shape, or form, the however many units wide that bounding box is, that font, that digital copy that is on your machine has that information in it. And we don't have to old school like try to make sure that these letters sit next to each other in a certain way, etc. The computer does it all for us. Same thing with the kerning table, right? Lists specific letter pairs and how the program should adjust the spacing between them, especially the typical example is the uppercase T, and if then you have any other lowercase letter sitting next to it, right? If these bounding boxes here, I'm pointing with my thing instead of the cursor, if these bounding boxes here did not overlap, you are going to see by nature kind of an odd space, okay? Teach your friends about kerning to drive them absolutely nuts, right? Font formats, okay? So PostScript. Adobe came up with PostScript language and types of fonts. So this is where you can see here the screen font, right? Whoops. The screen font, and then the outline or printer font. So does anybody remember dealing with two files like this a long time ago? Anybody?
Yeah.
And if one was missing, you were screwed, right? Nowadays, they are typically packaged together. They're all packaged together, so you can't accidentally separate them. But back in my day when I was working, I worked on the magazine for Nintendo Power. Anybody ever read that? I was working on that. So most of my fonts that are on my hard drive are from Nintendo. Don't tell anybody, especially don't post that on YouTube. Okay. It's been a long time. I think the statute of limitations is probably expired about stealing fonts, but whatever. So if you then did not have the PostScript outline portion of the font, or let's say it like this, that PostScript outline portion of the font was what communicated with laser printers like this that had Adobe PostScript built into it. So has anybody ever heard of Adobe PostScript at all, right? So that was the language that back in the day and still today that the font and the printer communicated to print. And also back in the day, PostScript fonts were basically, I believe, just Mac, right? But if they were just Mac, back in those days, what if you were working on a PC and then a Mac and then a PC and then a Mac? Anybody remember those days at all? Where it really, really, how you say, sucked ass, right? When you couldn't open up a file on both platforms. You had to export it, and exporting it never worked very well. So you were either stuck with, if you started on a Mac, you had to stay with a Mac. If you started on a PC, you had to stay with a PC. The hard drives were formatted differently, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Then I don't know what year it came out, but Mac basically formatted their hard drives to be compatible with the PCs. So that is why today you can use your little thumb drive on a PC and then it'll work on a Mac, because whatever they engineered, however they engineered it to get it to work, that's what happened a long time ago. So that PostScript didn't work universally. You can understand that that's a pretty big pain. So what was the solution? Well, in the 80s, Apple and Microsoft collaborated on a font format called TrueType. That was supposed to be a universal platform that if I had a TrueType type font, meaning if we are going to be looking here in Suitcase Fusion, we will see that we also have, or that we have OpenType, TrueType, okay? You probably won't see any PostScript type fonts in here. PostScript type fonts are relatively outdated in this day and age, primarily because, or at least I'll say primarily because, you cannot translate a PostScript font to all the font formats that you need to be read on the web. OpenType, TrueType, SVG, WOFF. Okay, and we'll get to that down the road.
I have this vague memory of people buying fonts on a giant cartridge they would plug into their printer itself. They put a cartridge of fonts into their printer. Is that?
That does not ring a bell to me.
Okay. It might have been prior to PostScript even.
Probably. You're, no offense,
Yeah.
you're a little older than I am,
Yeah.
right? Yeah.
Ancient.
Well, look at me, dude. I mean,
Well,
I can barely walk these days, right? I can barely make it to class. My problem is that I forget everything everywhere. I left my coffee cup in my car today. Realized that when I got to the building. I don't want to go walk back in the rain to my car to get my coffee. I have to go downstairs and buy another one. Right? Those are my problems. But nonetheless, we are going to be working primarily with OpenType and TrueType. So here's kind of what I'm saying to you. TrueType and OpenType are supposed to, in air quotes, supposed to be able to work on a Mac and work on a PC, and as well, when we get down the line to converting these into all of the necessary file formats to be used on the web using the @FontFace selector to import fonts into your web page, right? TrueType and OpenType can be converted. For some reason, I don't know why, PostScript cannot. So moral of this story, stay away from PostScript fonts in this class, okay? But nonetheless, that's the history of the font. Pretty relatively slim. But what does that mean for us? Well, let's talk about font management. Font management. So if you have, so I'll just open this folder here, and I have some fonts that I've probably, I don't know, Felt Tip Roman is one that I bought a long time ago, but the other ones are probably ones that I grabbed from this computer here. So let's say it like this. On both Macs and PCs now, they come with font management software. So back in the day, again, there's a lot of back in the day in this class, right? Does anybody remember trying to install a font and you actually had to take the font and drag it into a fonts folder in your system folder, right? That essentially is still what is happening, except now a program is doing it for you versus you dragging it into your fonts folder in your system folder, okay? So each Macintosh and each PC in this day and age comes with their own standard font management program. So if I wanted to, let's say, install Keynote MT for use, right? And I double clicked it, I would get this window that says install font. It gives me a little preview and it says, do you want to install the font? On a Mac, or excuse me, on a PC, theirs runs relatively similar. So when I clicked that, notice what actually happened, right? If you're a Mac user, you're used to looking up top left to see what program just opened, okay? So you can see here that font book just opened. Show all windows. Oh, come on. Window. There we go. So if I install font, problems have been found, great, whatever. Okay. It looks like they've wiped out everything here from font book. What I'm saying is, if you have, how many of you are going to be using your laptop, your MacBook? Okay. It's probably better if you can buy Suitcase, but it is about $50 or so. So you can get it through Academic Superstore. for $60, right? It is a really good font management software, but again, if you can't afford it, you're going to be using FontBook. Okay. Now, one of the things about FontBook, do not drag 11 billion fonts that you downloaded from somewhere into FontBook all at one time. FontBook is notorious for there is a setting to not activate the font when you bring them into the program. It notoriously doesn't work very well. So has anybody ever dragged a whole bunch of fonts into FontBook and the pinwheel of death started spinning? Anybody? No? And you went and made a sandwich and you came back and the pinwheel of death was still spinning. And you thought to yourself, okay, I'll go watch a TV program, and then 3 hours later the pinwheel of death is still spinning, right? It will crash your system, right? So moral of the story, don't take a font folder that has like 600 megs of fonts and dump them all into FontBook at the same time. But do it one at a time like that, okay? But the better program to use is, and what we have here on our computers is Suitcase. Now, when I said what actually happens when you activate a font, notice I said activate a font, and here's what I mean. Let's just take a look at this one. Alexa. Looks good to me for demo purposes. If I am in Adobe Illustrator and I choose this and I go to the character palette up here or the character palette over here, right? I can see if I open it up, Alexa is not in there. Why is it not in there? Well, Suitcase is recognizing it because it's in a fonts folder somewhere, either on this hard drive, or I believe the way they set it up is it is on the server somewhere, right, that Suitcase is accessing. But that font is not actually in your system folder, right? So it still works like that, where what I need to do then is choose this, and I can activate it temporarily, permanently, or deactivate it, okay? So let's say I activate it temporarily, which means that the next time that this computer shuts down and restarts, it won't be active. I go then to Adobe Illustrator, and sure enough, Alexa Standard is there. So I can choose that and choose Alexa Standard, right? So it's working for me. And I can print with it and do whatever I want with it. If I then deactivated it and went back to Illustrator, it is no longer active, okay? So in terms of managing fonts, you only want a certain amount of fonts actually activated on your computer. So why the pinwheel of death started spinning when I dragged a whole bunch of fonts into the FontBook application is it was then, what it was doing was, it was making a copy of that font and placing a copy of that font into the system folder. And if you have 11 billion fonts in your system folder, your system is not going to run very well, if at all, okay? So it becomes a performance issue after a while. So you want to keep your activated fonts to a moderate minimum, I guess, right? If you have 300 fonts activated, you are going to notice performance issues on your computer. Let's just say it like that, okay? So, like I said, if we open up, does everybody have Suitcase opened up? Right? So let's say, great, Mike. What about, do I have to always go through all of this list? In other words, if we look at what is chosen right now for viewing, we are up top there looking at 3,111 different fonts, right? I'm going to delete this set right there, remove. Then they have, in the font library, they have Font Folio and other fonts, and then system fonts. In other words, the system fonts are the fonts that are packaged with the operating system. Then the font library is wherever they have it on their servers, right? Then this program accesses those fonts from the servers, okay? So let's say you are looking at fonts and you can do several different things. How many of you over the weekend started looking at, I don't know, stuff like this? Or let me make an example out of what I did one time. So I was in a really cheesy band, like a lot of people are, a long time ago, called 13th Grade. And we had a song called Dirty Square Dancing. Not classroom appropriate, probably to play, but nonetheless. We needed a cheesy, or I needed a cheesy, cowboyish type font or typeface. So what did I do? I went to the Google machine and typed in cowboy fonts. So if we're talking communication, do these typefaces fonts communicate cowboy to you? Right? Probably with more cheese than you'd like. But again, we were a cheesy band and that was part of our shtick, and you know, we wanted to embrace the cheese. So wherever I found whatever rope typeface I did, '42 free Western fonts. Bogus flow, sure, looks great for demonstration purposes. Put it in the downloads folder. Bogus flow. I then have been in my folder here, in my documents folder. I have been keeping a Mike's Fonts folder. And let's say I can't live without bogus flow. That's what I need to do my logo in, hence notice the sarcasm, right? But let's say, okay, how do I get that to be activated and used in Adobe Illustrator? First thing that I would want to do is here in Suitcase, I would want to make a new set that I can use every time I log into a Mac on this campus. So, File, New Set. Mike's Fonts. Sounds like a good name for a folder. There's nothing in there right now. I can drag bogus flow in here. And here's the thing, right? There are a multitude of ways you can start previewing fonts for use in your type study. One is to simply go through Suitcase here, and right now yours probably says the quick brown fox jumps over the lazy dog, right? Because that has all the letters of the alphabet in it. If you then click on this button right here, that's where, because what I wanted to do was use the business name Premium Design Works, and also my personal name, I typed in Mike Sinkula of Premium Design Works. So you could type in there your name of whatever business name, right? And therefore, you would see a preview of what that typeface looks like before you go using it in Illustrator. So let's say, yep, I can't live without that one. I need to use it. I can activate it merely by turning it on right here. Now it's going to activate it temporarily. I can select it and say permanent. So I believe every time I log in here, this will be active in Suitcase or on the machine for me. Somebody test that for me down the road, right? So now, if I go back to Illustrator and I click here, and then I go to the type tool, sure enough, bogus flow is indeed there. I can also see that it is a true type typeface. Okay. Most of the typefaces that you find online today will be true type or open type. You don't necessarily have to worry about it. But then I can choose bogus flow, and it looks absolutely horrid. But, you know, that could be a font that you use on a poster of some sort for your band that is cheesy, right? Looks cheesy enough. So I could have used that. Oops, wrong window. I could have used that possibly here, right? I used a font called Rope right there, I think it was called. But nonetheless, that's how you can start collecting. So how many of you have been looking at fonts online? Okay, so that's one way of doing it, right? Again, another way of doing it is that you have access to all these fonts here, okay? Now, there also is a palette in Illustrator that works ish. It takes a long time to load. It's not the quickest thing in the world. But if you go up under Window, Extensions, Extensis, this is an extension of Suitcase Fusion, where hopefully the whole library of fonts will eventually load in that window. If not, it might be the case of, let me quit out of this, don't save, right? If I go back to my hard drive here and I say logo type study 1 and I open it up, here's the thing. If you just, what I've noticed, and this is kind of a buggy thing, is if I just closed this where it wanted to find fonts, then the Extensis extension wouldn't work. I know, totally logical, right? 100% logical. So if I just go, yeah, find fonts, whatever, sure, done, great, blah, blah, blah. And then I went to the Extensis palette. Come on, work. I might have to send a note in about it not working, or we'll give it a few minutes. But basically, if you can get that palette to work, you will have the whole list of fonts that are in Suitcase, right? But like I said, a good way to go about this is just start, you know, you can start going through this, right? And it will then show you the font and also the whole family behind it, right? And you can just start making your way. You know, and start giving yourself a variety of stuff, meaning do some serif fonts, do some sans serif fonts, and we'll talk about it down the road a little bit more. But what a serif font is the typefaces that have kind of the little extremities, right? Versus a sans serif font that does not. It's pretty much block versus scripty type fonts. In other words, give yourself a diverse set of fonts to start looking through. And what you can do then is if you are saying to yourself, let's do this. Close my eyes. Mark, tell me when to stop.
Stop.
Banco Standard Roman, can't live without that one. So I can then do this. I can take this font, whoops, and put it into my Mike's fonts. Okay, now. Closing the door. We've got some top secret stuff to talk about here.
You know you're recording.
I know I'm recording, but you do not show this to the dean
Oh.
or the president or anybody, right? Let's say you have these fonts in here. One is from the school set and one is from the internet. But you want to take this one from the school set with you and use it somewhere else outside of school. Whoa, what's that little plus sign there? I just let it go on the desktop. What happened? Oh, collected fonts. Banco Standard, it's in there. Oh, wow, I wonder if I could then documents. I wonder if I could put that in my Mike's Fonts folder. Well, look at that. I bet you I could put that on my thumb drive and walk out of this room with it. Okay? Now, don't bring a terabyte hard drive into class and go taking them all, right? But the ones that you need to use, right? Because if we ever get caught, right, I can say that, well, they need to be able to use it on the computers at home or maybe the ones down in the computer lab, and the computers in the computer lab can't access this font set and they need to complete their assignments, right?
True.
True. See what I'm saying? I help you, you don't get me in trouble. What time is this class over? 3:15 or 3:20?
3:20.
Huh? 3:20? Let's see. Let's see if that palette opened up in Illustrator yet. Nope. Are all you guys testing that palette? Is it opening up for anybody?
Nope.
No? Okay, I'll have to send a note in. But essentially, you could also then, you know, like I said, on my resources page, articles, 30 fonts that all designers must know and should own, 80 beautiful typefaces for professional design, right? You can start going and looking for this kind of stuff and This is what I'm talking about by classic typefaces: Adobe Caslon, Bedoni, Clarendon, Lucida. You know, some of these are more classic than others, but Trajan is definitely classic, right? That Trajan is the one that I use in integrated financial, et cetera, et cetera. But, you know, again, what you are going to do, you have to do 10 for your business name, 10 for your personal name to start out with. And then the next time around, you're going to start combining stuff. And then the third time around, you're going to start pushing it further and hopefully come up with some rough comps that you can pass by me and do our critique so I can push you into final logo stage production, etc. 320. Okay. So
Are those 20 fonts then, or just 10 business name and the same 10 that are ones we chose for the?
either or,
Oh, thank you.
you know,
Sure.
as long as you do 10 of your business and 10 of your personal, you know, if you have, if you use Trajan for both, right? Now, don't do them completely identical,
All right.
right? Because, you know, like I said, what you need to start doing is taking a look at, well, how does this communicate,
Yeah.
right?
They'll say different things for the name versus whatever the business.
Yeah, yeah. You know, and like I said, you know, do more than 10, 20, 30, right? You know. So anyway, that's how you're going to manage your fonts in here. So lastly, let's talk about, well, why would you want to choose one typeface over another? Again, communication, communication, communication. Well, what are the principles of how we know what to choose for what? Well, first and foremost, in terms of paragraphs, right? Readability. So I may or may not have told you this story. Again, I'm getting old and my memory is not so great, right? I'm turning into that guy, Michael, right? You and me, right?
I am that guy.
Yeah. So when I was a freshman in college, if you thought my ego was big now, you should have seen me as a freshman in college. So I took a class that I didn't know was a class that you had to be a junior or more to take it. I took it anyway, but whatever. It was a literature class, and I had a paper that I was writing on, I don't know, whatever book it was. It was set in London, blah, 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 blah. So I thought I was going to be cute because you understand, you see where I'm going with this, right? Right. So I was used to, I knew I wrote well. I went to an all boys prep Catholic high school, et cetera, et cetera. I knew I wrote well. So when I got a B- on my paper, I was pissed. This is an A paper, I thought to myself. I did. I was 18, man. What did I know? Right? I turned the whole paper in that typeface. Why? Because it fit the genre of what we were talking about. And again, 18 years old. What did I know? Right? I got a B-. And I thought to myself, it wasn't until, and then so I put that out of my memory. And it wasn't until I started teaching this class and I had to explain the concept of readability that then that little nugget from my past surfaced. And I went, oh, that's why I got a bad grade on that paper. Is because if I had the whole paper printed out in a font like this, how easy was it to read? Right. So whether the instructor made a conscious decision of, well, this stupid little freshman, I don't know. It might have been just a subconscious, right? In other words, readability. The ease of which you can read this paragraph or paragraphs or pages. We'll talk about the difference between legibility and readability and how to push those boundaries for logo design. But if you have paragraphs of text, you need to have your text be readable. Therefore, when I was talking about serif typefaces, in the print world, serif typefaces took off whenever they did, largely because in the print world, if you had these extra little characteristics at the bottoms of and at the tops of letter forms, it helped in terms of distinguishing one letter form from another to aid in readability. Now that we are in a web world and we are at 72 pixels per inch, those don't render quite as well. So hence the popularity of sans serif typefaces on the web. Now, you can use serif typefaces on the web if you present them big enough that their characteristics can render well enough at 72 pixels per inch. Okay? But the long and the short of it is, we know that some typefaces are easier to read than others in certain applications, right? Like books, reading paragraphs, reading term papers, etc. So when we get to you setting your body copy in this class, we'll talk much more about readability. Another characteristic or principle that you might want to take into consideration is emphasis. Well, a classic way to express emphasis, visual punctuation, is merely to make something bold. This is important, right? So if you have ever been sitting in any one of my lectures, and what I have done for myself to where my lectures are meant for somewhat reading, you know, they're bullet pointy lectures, but they're meant to be somewhat read in comprehension, but then they're also meant to be read as bullet points. So what I have a habit of doing is making the points that I want to say aloud in class, like visual punctuation, I will make them bold in my paragraphs so that I can call that out in class. Emphasis. I want to emphasize this point, right? So that's where heavier typefaces and the bold typeface come into play. Next, we have display and decoration. Okay. Display typefaces are, well, display and decoration. I'll go back to this poster. This is display right here, meaning it's branded within a genre. It looks cowboy-esque, okay? But it still can be read as a headline. Everybody can get this and they can say to themselves, bottomless keg, I'm there, right? Versus this up here is more decoration. It's really, really artistically drawn type for a decorative purpose. You can tell, you can notice that readability of this one is better than readability of that one. So the more decorative you go, the less readable it will be. Hence the decorative, really set in a genre, really kind of slapping you upside the face kind of thing, okay? So in terms of display and decoration, I mentioned a word. That is a very important word. That is also a word you are going to latch onto in this class and other classes, especially when talking about type. Genre. What genre does it sit in? Genre is a word that basically means how do you classify a certain group of, whether it is a group of things that were in a year, like the 1800s, or in a community like the tech community, right? It is just a way of classifying a group like that. So, Cooper Black, what genre does that sit in? Or how would you describe that?
Emphasis or impact?
Huh?
Impact,
Okay.
emphasis.
Emphasis?
70s, 80s.
Cartoons.
Cartoons. Specifically, which cartoon?
Garfield?
Garfield.
Really?
Yes.
Wow, let's do the. Oh, cool.
Okay.
Again,
So some typefaces get put into a genre just because they are used in a genre, like I'm just gonna yoga studio font. Come on, Papyrus, you got to be in there somewhere. You got to be in there somewhere. Oh, I was let down. That was the first time I did that. Oh, there it is. Right. So fonts for yoga studios would be a genre, right? How do you put something into a genre? Well, it just sort of evolves that way, right? London. Why is this in that genre of Old English, Old London? It was just merely the way they wrote stuff at that time, right? So as genre sitting in a period of time, Victorian, Old English, whatever, right? And that's how the tools we used and et cetera, that's why it sits in that genre. So when I say something like Cooper Black, cartoons, right? Be careful of associations. Oh, I can't look at Cooper Black any longer and not think Garfield. So unfortunately, you are going to have to take associations into account, right? Do I want to represent myself alongside a Garfield? Yes or no, right? Franklin Gothic. Associations, genres, whatever. Microsoft originally used Franklin Gothic in one of their logos, their logo from the 90s. Okay. Adobe Lithos, what does this say to you?
Greek restaurant.
Greek restaurant. Exactly. So that's what I'm talking about by communication. Looking at these, what do they say to you? Do they represent the idea, the genre, how you want to represent? How about these two?
Deco.
Art Deco, France, Art Deco. Circus. Ooh, that's a good one. Tattoo shop or really cheesy country music. Right? What about this one?
MASH, military.
MASH. Or the A-Team.
Oh, yeah.
Right? I can't look at Stencil without thinking B.A. Baracus. Right? B.A. Baracus being the character that Mr. T played. Okay? So I would stick to more, like I said, classical type to start out with, but don't be afraid then to go into a little bit more display and decoration. What I don't want to have happen is don't let your typeface design your logo for you. Meaning, typing out something in this font does not make a logo, even though it looks very artistic, right? Using a very decorative typeface like this as part of your logo may work, right? Let's see if I can find it. AJ, not AJ Hansen. I'd have to find it. It's linked through my site somewhere. But lastly, color and contrast, the environment in which your type sits. Black over white, I can use a regular weight typeface with moderistic characteristics. White over black, does everybody see how the black encroaches in on the white typeface? You're going to have to use a heavier, whiter typeface if you are going to go over a color like that. Okay, so again, today is Tuesday, right? How I know it's Tuesday is I do this. I go to my website and I look up there. That's for me and you too. I mean, you can use the date up there, but that's basically so I know where I am. So Thursday will be Open Lab in here. Again, how I run Open Labs is I will, when we get to grading and feedback is done during the Open Labs. If you do not show up during the Open Labs, that's when I also hand back your assignments. So if you haven't gotten any feedback on assignments, it's probably because you have not shown up for the Open Lab to get feedback on your assignments. Okay, so that's my system of how I do that. Let's see, hopefully that recorded all the way.